Okay.
And we're live streaming.
Thanks, Pauline. Good evening and welcome everyone. This meeting is being live streamed on YouTube, so welcome to everyone viewing on YouTube. Elected members unable to join the meeting in person are able to join remotely. However, they will not be able to vote and their attendance will not be officially recorded, although their virtual attendance will be noted in the minutes. Non-voting independent members unable to join the meeting in person are also able to join remotely. They retain speaking rights and are encouraged to turn on their cameras when asking questions. With regard to the meeting etiquette, please may I ask that you indicate you wish to speak by raising your physical hand. Please note that the chat function on Zoom will not be used in the meeting and questions or comments on the agenda pack should be raised via the chair. Okay, item 1, apologies for absence and substitutes. Are there any apologies for absence or lateness?
Yes, there's apologies for absence from Councillor Elizabeth Booker, and we have a substitute member, Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor, are you aware of any other absences?
Councillor Arik Chowdhury.
Thank you, Councillor Chadha.
Apologies.
Item 2, declarations of interest. Those members who are physically present, are there any declarations of interest? Thank you. Minutes of the last meeting. Members are requested to consider and agree the accuracy of the minutes of the last meeting of the Audit Committee held on the 29th of September 2022. To the members in the room present, may I see by a show of hands, are the minutes agreed?
Chair, can I propose a slight amendment? On item 8, the year ahead a forward plan. I think what I asked was for an internal audit of the council tax issue, but then it was explained that the report that we're receiving tonight may be sufficient. So just for accuracy, it was an internal audit.
Oh, I see.
I requested it.
So members agreed by a show of hands with the accuracy? Thank you. Item 4, action log. The committee is asked to note the contents of the action log and the actions to be closed at this meeting. Are there any questions on the report? Okay, thank you. To the members present in the room, may I see by a show of hands this report is noted? Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor. Item 5, performance development scheme appraisals. I note that the Chief Executive and the corporate management team have joined us for this item. Welcome and thank you for your attending. I invite the officer, Conrad Hall, to give a brief introduction to the report, and then I will open the floor to questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So just 1 minute from me, really, just to kind of walk you through the documents that you have, and then if it's okay, Chair, I'll hand over to the Chief Executive. So you've got a short narrative cover report that just explains what the council's process for appraisals is. And critically, I think important to emphasise in that that although most appraisals are intended to be recorded through the Fusion system, which is the sort of main computer system that the council, like many other organisations nationally and internationally, uses. For some staff, particularly those in frontline roles, they don't have routine access to there, but alternative arrangements have been in place to ensure that those staff are also part of the appraisal process. And the reason that's important then, if you turn to the 3 appendices, what you have, first one, for information really, just sort of explains the guidance and policy that's issued around that. You've then got the 2 appendices, numbers 2 and 3, giving the summary of percentage of appraisals included and other relevant information about those for 21 year just gone, and you know, objective setting part of the process for the current financial year, and to emphasise then that the data in those sort of brings together both sources, so it's appraisals, you know, recorded in the system, or for those staff where you know, for understandable reasons they don't have access to that, you know, there's an alternative system put in place and we've integrated that data. So what you have here is a sort of rounded record of all of the information that's available. And as said, and I'm sure Colin will want to come in. Management team is then here really to take questions on it. So I won't speak beyond just kind of walking you through the papers like that. Clearly, I know that there'll be questions later, but I think it's probably best to stop there.
You go first.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you receive a pay award without having set objectives or a performance appraisal being completed in this organisation?
So the system is set up at the moment. It differentiates between staff on SMR grades, senior management grades, and all other staff. The sort of basic principle, which is standard in local government, is at the end of the year, one would receive incremental progression. In other words, you're on point 30 of the pay scale or whatever, and one would move up to 31. And just for the avoidance of doubt, I assume your question means a pay award in that sense rather than the annual pay or whatever may be agreed with the unions. For senior manager grades, the position is different because it is much more explicitly linked to performance, so that the increment is not kind of sort of pretty automatically awarded. So for most staff, unless there are capability or other sort of serious concerns, the incremental progression is frankly automatic. For senior management graded staff, it is dependent on satisfactory performance.
Okay, because looking at the data, in 21-22, 25% of staff have not had an appraisal, and 22-23, this current year, 43% of our staff don't have any agreed objectives. I note a couple of weeks ago, but the chief executive and the mayor and other senior officers came to overview and discuss a corporate redesign. My challenge will be, would it not be cheaper and more effective for the residents of Newham that staff, every member of staff, had an appraisal, had their objectives, rather than completing a corporate redesign? If you look at the management and corporate world out there, that often don't lead to value for money. I wonder if there's a comment on that, because it does seem, based on the data and waiting to be proved incorrect, we have a large amounts of staff in our organisation who are working to no objectives and are not performance managed. I wonder if there any comments on that.
Want me to start?
Yeah, okay, you start.
So, no question, all staff should have an appraisal conducted and should be set objectives. And just again, for the avoidance of doubt on that, I mean, there are some legitimate exceptions to that. So, for example, the way we record the data is that for someone who's in probation period, although they will have targets relating to their probation period, we say that they don't form part of the ordinary appraisal process because there is a separate process running. I mean, that's perhaps sort of terminology, but that is why you have on the data provided there some staff where the appraisal is recorded as not required. Doesn't mean they're not subject to performance management, but it just kind of works in a different way.
On the next step, number 5, the action needs to be to communicate and remind. I summarise. Would it not be helpful to have something a little bit stronger than to remind and communicate? Because at the moment we've got a large amounts of staff who are getting paid good money with no objectives and no performance appraisal and no objectives, right? So I would have thought in the next steps a little bit stronger than communicate and remind. And also in the guidance, I note, why is there no mention of the consequences for senior managers of not completing appraisals? I'm sure of us, we've been in work environments where it was, if you don't complete the appraisal of your staff, you'd be very unlikely to have a job. That's how serious it was held in organisations, because if managers don't appraise their staff, then the organisation fails. We're in the people business, so I'm a little bit concerned, as you may detect from my tone, but we've got loads of people walking around just getting paid and not being held to account. When you look at the in the appendices on the performance one, the organisational average is 18.6 for non-completion of appraisals. When I look, there are some offenders, if I can be so bold. Children's at 40.1. One source, can't read my own writing, I think it's 33.1. Marketing, I don't know what that is 28.3. And adults and health at 20.4. So I just wondered, and also on the employer dashboard, I think it could be better. I just wondered perhaps from you, Conrad and Colin, what assurances the audit board can get of in-year improvements in this situation.
So, and I really should have checked before this meeting what the figures were in when this matter was first raised at the audit committee previously. Regretfully, I didn't. I know they were a lot worse. So, there has been a significant push to emphasise, I agree with you, emphasise a basic management discipline. That the appraisal process is not just a sort of, a year-end tick box, but it is incredibly important part of making sure that everyone is performing to their best of their ability, and that it is used as an opportunity to identify areas for improvement, but also to recognise opportunities for development and indeed help staff further their careers as well. I don't have the figures to hand. I know that they were significantly lower. So there's been significant progress on that. I don't think anyone here is suggesting that the overall rate of 75% is satisfactory. In fairness, no organisation ever gets quite to 100% because there's always some, issue of long-term sick.
Yeah.
But I don't think anyone is suggesting it's as it should be.
Yep. Do you mind
If you could, please.
Yeah. So, and thank you for the questions. Very much appreciated. I think that the only thing I'll add to what Conrad said, and I'm just going to go through some of what you've said in response. First and foremost, around this is a priority. So for me and for the corporate management team, why they're here is because we do see this as an absolute priority. I think as Conrad's reflected, it'd be great if we could pull that out the minutes from the last meeting. I think it was very low in terms of the potential outturn position, and we've seen significant improvement in that. You mentioned where we're up to so far, and just to make it really clear for audit board, I look at these stats every single week. I'm asking corporate directors and their management teams to confirm why some of those areas are so low. Not in a.
Could I just ask you, Colin?
Yeah.
How are you're saying you're seeing it every week. We saw this in about June, and as Conrad said, the figures are really low. So what was your view when you saw the figures so low in June? What did you personally do as the interim chief exec to push?
Yeah, sure. So yes.
In the annual governance statement as an issue, so a bit more stronger response from you in terms of how it's affecting the organisation.
In terms of the response was very much about this being a corporate issue. So straight away, we wanted to have a weekly update at corporate management team in terms of the improvements we wanted to see, both in terms of the outturn, but also in terms of the objective setting for the year. Week on week, we've been discussing it as a corporate management team to understand where people have got to. And we have seen a significant improvement. I think the outturn position, and I think it was around 20 to 25% when it was presented at audit board back in September. It's now at 75%, such is the importance that we've placed on that as a corporate management team. Every week we've had to look at the outturn, and then we've had to look at objective setting. And objective setting, we are still seeing objectives still come in. So at the end of last week, that was up to 60%. So we continue with that. I think in terms of what assurance can we give to the board, I think it's very much a priority for me and the corporate management team that performance management starts and ends with the staff. So we need to be very clear with the staff around what their objectives are for the year. If those conversations have not been held, then they have to have been held and be recorded, so that we can be very clear about performance management. And that's what, to me, it's absolutely important that we do that. So I expect to see improvements to continue happening over the course of the rest of the year. And I'd like to think that when we come back with the annual governance statement at the end of this financial year, you will see marked improvement in terms of performance development scheme and the outcomes that we want to achieve.
Just in terms of following up on a question that Councillor Paul had, in what what penalty is there for senior managers who don't enforce the application of appraisals? Because where is the sort of, this is important if there's no sanction?
Yeah.
So that comes from the top. So what action is the top taking?
So what's not in this paper is that as part of the objective setting process for this year, all senior managers and managers have had that they have to complete the appraisal process as one of their own objectives. So their own objectives and outcome scores will be dependent on the completion of performance development schemes across their services and teams. So it's built in. If we go to the point that Conrad made around incremental rises linked to management outcomes, then those two are being linked, and we've re-emphasised that point as part of what we've done with managers, both in terms of the senior leadership team, which is the directors, belief, corporate management team, but also the senior leadership forum, which is the managers underneath that.
So if that isn't achieved, they won't receive an increment or performance pay?
Yes.
Okay.
So we've been very clear about how those two things are linked together.
Okay, councillor.
Just to follow on that, so on section 5, next steps, it says communicate and remind. I think the thrust is the committee will want to see a little bit more stronger around that. Is there some, just to push you on what you just said there? So there's CMT and DMT. I'm not sure what the next one below, but is there something saying that if a senior manager sits on CMT, if their DMTs haven't completed their appraisals, they will not get an increment at all, or the annual, the increment and the annual award? The
annual, if you're sorry, if you don't mind, Chair. So the annual award is obviously linked to, I'm not talking about a national pay rise. Right. That's obviously something that's done through government and is something that's allocated to all public service workers. What I'm talking about is the increment within the scale that people work towards.
Okay. So if we're here at some point in the future and there is still some, let's say, weakness in completion, we will also see commensurate with that certain members of staff not getting pay rises. Is that correct?
Yes.
Chair, if I may, just push back slightly on this, comment Councillor Paul made, sort of strengthening section 5. I think it is important to emphasise, I'm not suggesting that this, needs to be a sort of sanction-free zone or anything like that. But the really important part on appraisal process is actually making sure that managers and staff recognise the value of it and the importance of carrying it out and want to do it. And that actually you do achieve that through communicating and reminding. We can make the sort of precise language on that. I'm not suggesting that there should be no sanctions, but I do think it's important we don't only talk in terms of sanctions.
It's a fair pushback.
I would just add that is about the culture of the organisation, which we've referenced many times, but we've not really had any solid activity plan of how the culture within the organisation is going to change and pull Newham forward. So that should be at the top of the list. Pauline, can I just ask you, what is your plans in terms of changing the culture within the organisation? As Conrad said, people take this seriously. They understand the golden thread that everybody has a part to play in delivering the objectives of the council, the residents.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, the culture of the organisation is more than the performance development scheme. There are many different linkages that we have to consider when we're talking about culture. But this is a real key component part of it. I mean, since May, one of the things we have been doing is creating a new corporate delivery plan. That shows at the high level the objectives that the organisation wants to do. We then have service plans underneath that, which are done at a directorate and service level, so that people absolutely understand the objectives they need to do at a localised level, which links back to the corporate delivery plan. And then we have the performance development scheme that goes hand in hand with that. As you can see, as I said at the beginning, I take this extremely seriously because we will not deliver Building a Fairer Newham or any corporate delivery plan that we have if we've not got a high performing culture within the organisation. But more than that, I think there's another couple of things that I just wanted to talk about. Number one is about, I think we were just talking about the consequences of things that happens, but actually it's also about appreciating the staff that we have got too. So over the last 2 years, I was the lead for staff recognition. So we hadn't actually said thank you to our staff for over 15 years. We hadn't said thank you to our staff. And so over the last 18 months to 2 years, we've put in place actually a staff awards program. We've got a lot more now around health and wellbeing to make sure, especially during COVID-19, that they've got the support that they need. So that's a really big pivotal part. I think that, it does go side by side with that. The other side to that is the things we're doing to change workplace conditions. So we've already looking at changes to overtime. We're already looking at changes to maternity pay as well, moving things back to where they should be and making sure that we're a really good, fair employer. So I think it's a combination of those things that we need to do. We've got a strong leadership team in place. We are making sure that we're conversing with the staff on a very regular basis. So I have monthly meetings with the staff, all staff, and it's open. You can ask any question you like. I actually quite like the fact that we're getting 300-400 people turn up to each one of those discussions. That too is also talking about the culture that I want in the organisation. And I want to foster and empower people to be able to deliver their very best. But this is all hand in hand with a system of different things that we need to have in place.
Okay, thank you, Colin. Councillor Chowder, please.
Thank you. Firstly, I'm quite taken by your statement that colleagues haven't been thanked for 15 years. So as a new councillor, I'd like to put on record thanks and appreciation for the work that's done. And I think that's quite lapse of the leadership to have not done that. So, yeah, I think that's quite telling. So just a couple of logistical questions, and forgive me. Do we know what percentage of employees are outside of Fusion? So who wouldn't be part of this cap? That I appreciate that may be something you don't have to hand, but could that be something that's shared with the committee?
It could be, but just to sort of check the sort of gist of the question, because what has happened is for those staff who don't have access to Fusion, and it's not that they're sort of denied it, it's just that they don't use a computer in their day-to-day job. Essentially, I mean, it's slightly more complicated, but essentially, the appraisal process has been carried out manually, and a record of that sent to HR, who have collated the data, including the manager's confirmation that this took place and this was scored and so on. And all of that has been integrated into the data that you have here. So yes, I can find out for you how many staff don't have access to Fusion, but that has not been an impediment to carrying out the appraisals. It's the point.
Sure. My thinking behind it was that for those who don't have access to Fusion, there's maybe needed a different type of approach to supervision. It's one thing if you can go into your own personnel records and you can look at them. If you can't in the same way, then I think that's sometimes a different way of communicating, which goes back to the piece about culture that Fiona mentioned earlier. So just kind of coming back on that as well, the staff that aren't recorded or that don't receive PDRs, they're because they're usually on probation, is that right? Or
well, we have shown on here that there are some staff who are not required to have the performance review system as part of the appraisal process. The most common example of that is because someone is in probation and so a different system operates to ensure that they are performance managed. So it's not that they're not performance managed, but they don't receive a formal appraisal through the appraisal process. Where, it's sort of slightly linguistic, if you see what I mean, because the important point is they're still performance managed. That's why we've excluded these from the data. There are one or two other exceptions to that. So, for example, if someone's been on long-term sick for a very, very long period of time, then it wouldn't have been possible or necessary or appropriate to have carried out an appraisal. So we've kind of made some exclusions from the data for reasons like that.
Thank you. So where I'm going with this is when you look at certain departments and they're disproportionately affected by it, and thinking here of kind of children's services, is that because the workforce is more agency staff, and who's responsible for those objective settings?
Could I ask Tim to come in, please? I know you've just come into the meeting, but I also wanted to pick up on the point that children was the lowest in terms of completion on appraisals here, please.
Okay, so the first question was around access to Fusion, or
I think that's been addressed.
So
the question was around, is the workforce count that's represented here, including agency staff, and is that why? What happens around agency staff? Maybe that's an easier question. What happens around agency staff and their support and supervision?
So the highest proportion of agency staff that have in children's services is children's social work. Agency workers, because they're not directly employed by the council, aren't subject to the same appraisal process, but they will still receive supervision. So it's not recorded on Fusion, but all social workers or anyone practicing in social care will receive very regular supervision. In terms of the headcount, I don't believe, and Conrad will correct me, I don't believe the agency workers are included in the headcount for the Fusion, the proportion of completed PDRs. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah, so again, our appraisal process does not require the sort of formal appraisal to be carried out for agency staff on the basis that, you know, one of the significant reasons for an appraisal process, of course, is to deal with issues of staff development and promotion and so on. Again, you know, to emphasise, that doesn't mean they're not performance managed. It's just we don't record it through that way for.
I'm just trying to account for what made up that figure so high. And also, I think the same for, it's rather ironic that inclusive economy is disproportionately affected as well. So I just wondered if there was any thinking about why those departments in particular are struggling. Yes, please, Tim.
Yeah, so children's services. First thing I want to say is I agree with the concerns of the committee and absolutely agree that a priority for us is to increase the proportion of employees who have appraisals that are formally recorded on the Fusion system. I can go on to talk about some steps we've taken more recently and the fact that we've got, I think, over 75% now with objectives on Fusion. So we're moving in the right direction and determined this year that performance is higher. I think, you know, I won't talk at length, but there hasn't been a culture of completing appraisals or putting them on the system in children's services for some time. And it's one of many things we've been grappling with in terms of our improvement work. But certainly probably since September last year, a very, very strong focus for us has been around preparing for officer inspection. So that doesn't mean that we're not supporting and supervising staff, and nor does it mean we're not focusing on performance. That real drive to ensure that all of that was recorded on the Fusion system, frankly, wasn't one of our top priorities at that point. You know, and we can have the argument about whether it should have been or shouldn't be, but, you know, with a limited bandwidth and with a very, you know, my top priority was to get out of inadequate work, get out of intervention, and that's where I put my focus. Now we're in a different place. I've already got a team working on supporting staff to get those objectives on Fusion. Like I said, we're over 75% now, and my aim is to, you know, to increase that further by the end of the year. But you know, absolutely recognise it's not where we want it to be, and we are committed to improving it.
Do you think the position will be different this time next year?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, okay, that's good to hear. And one final question.
Yes.
Very quick. How does all of this data relate to the number of grievances, employment disputes, employment tribunals or NDAs that are in circulation in the council? I'm thinking it might be helpful to kind of overlay how many times has there been a grievance or a dispute issue that could have been resolved because there had been a supervision or support practicing?
I agree with you. In strong performance management, you clearly never in any organisation, certainly not on the scale of Newham, avoid any such employment matters. But strong performance management, including sort of regular supervision or one-to-one meetings, is clearly a good means of reducing that. As indeed, is using a really, really clear system to record the outcomes of that through the appraisal process, because quite often when we get into sort of dispute territory, one of the things we see is the claim, well, there was no appraisal, The manager says, well, yes, there was, and that there's not clear evidence, there may be exchange or whatever. That's a really strong advantage of having a clear system that absolutely demonstrates unambiguously that it did take place, because the way the process works in Fusion, the manager and the employee both have steps to complete in that. So it's therefore unambiguous, whether or not the appraisal took place.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Chaddock. Councillor Paul, very last quick question, please, and we need to move to the next item.
No, it's just to say, but we asked at the last meeting about some data on NDAs.
Oh, yes.
And that has not been forthcoming to date. I just want to put it on the record, but we're still waiting for that, because that is germane to the question which Councillor Chadder mentioned.
Okay, we can make sure that can be followed through, please.
If you don't mind, Chair, can I just ask a question? Hello, I'm Kulsum Seth, I'm one of the independent members. Today, you're mentioning that in the past, the performance management was a lot lower than it is now, so the percentages were a lot lower. So does that mean, how many years has that gone for? And does that mean that for all those years, those people have not received like Newham-based increments? Just because, like I'm at PwC and I know that we have that rating system that you've got on your papers, and depending on the rating that you get some sort of an increment. I don't know what the council's increment system is or whatever, but it would be, I guess, thinking about the incentives for the individuals on doing their performance appraisals, and if there's that many years that they haven't done it, does that mean that's that many years that they haven't moved a spot up their band?
Conrad, if you could respond, please.
The system works the other way around, really. So, I think I understand exactly where you're going, and I recognise the concerns in that. Actually, the system sort of works the other way around, for good or for ill. This was the process that was in place, that the increment was essentially automatic. So the non-carrying out of an appraisal didn't prevent someone getting their incremental pay rise. Clearly, as has been discussed, what we want to do is to move to a more modern performance management system that has a stronger link between pay and performance. I think it's very clear that in the local authority sector and the public sector generally, one very rarely sees bonus systems, for example. We're not you're never going to have that sort of private sector approach in a local authority with that focus on it. But to the extent that it is practical within the sector that we're working to have a stronger link between performance and pay, we've explained that we think that is important, and we will be adding that in.
And are there non-financial incentives that I don't know what, I can't think from the top of my head, but are there non-financial incentives that could be introduced so that people are more incentivized, as opposed to a disciplinary for not doing it? Is there an incentive that they might want to do it?
Well, I think that's my point. I think it's really helpful that you've highlighted it. What we have seen for, because of the extra push on it, and I'm not suggesting that we're nearly all the way there yet, but it's a lot better than it was. Because it is now being carried out better than it was, for those staff actually having a proper appraisal, that includes discussion, for example, about their career aspirations and how those might be fulfilled, and fair challenge about things that haven't gone so well and so on. That's seen as much more of a kind of positive experience, and equally for those staff where the system is being used more robustly than wasn't the case, and they've not received a very good score on that. There may not be a financial penalty for that, but actually the staff concerned have taken that as quite a sort of start, actually, and the system is working the way it should do, and acting to encourage better performance. There's a long way to go. I'm not suggesting we have fixed it at all, so I think carrying out the process really does help in that respect.
Okay, sorry, I'm going to have to draw this item to a close, please. So for the reasons set out in the report and its appendices, the committee is recommended to note the report. To members present in the room, may I see by a show of hands, is there agreement to this? Thank you. I'd like to thank Colin and all members of CMT for coming tonight, and for those online, and just to reiterate the importance of this issue for the committee. So we will be following up. There was some requests for information that we need, so if that could be done, and we'd be looking for next year to make sure that there is significant improvement, and also the culture part needs to be addressed because we're still waiting to hear what's happening with that. Okay.
How do we measure culture?
Okay, thank you.
That'd be very interesting, Chair. Culture, how do you define it? How do you measure it? And that would be very useful to know written down, because I hear a lot about culture. No one's defined it, no one's measured it, no one's telling me where point A is and point B. So I'll just put it on the record. So when, Colin, you do come back, that is what I'll be personally asking you.
That should be in part of a strategy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Be defined to say what the organisation's culture is so that we can see the measures against how it actually works in practice. Okay, item 6, children's services, further progress on the Ofsted quality assurance half yearly. I invite the officer, Tim Aldridge, to give a brief introduction to the report, and then I will open the floor to questions. Tim, thank you.
Okay, I'll keep it brief. You've got the report in front of you, and you've also got a copy of the Ofsted report. Members of the committee might be aware that the last inspection of children's services in Newham was in 2019, and at that inspection, the service was graded inadequate overall, with an inadequate rating for leadership, an inadequate rating for children care and care leavers, and a requires improvement rating for children need of protection and early help. So that resulted in intervention from the Department for Education and the appointment of a improvement advisor who chaired an improvement board. Since 2019, steps have been taken to drive improvement across children's services, and I joined Newham in October 2019, 3 years ago, and one of my top priorities was to drive improvements across children's social care, and in doing so, address the concerns that have been raised by Ofsted. And there were a number of monitoring visits, I think 5 monitoring visits since 2019. And pleased to say that we were re-inspected 2 weeks in July this year. And the findings of Ofsted, well, they rated us overall good, with a good rating for children in need of protection and early help, a good rating for children care and care leavers, and an outstanding rating for leadership. And as I said, you've got a short report that sets out some of the areas that Ofsted looked at, but in essence felt that we have created an environment where social work can flourish, that were taken strong steps to improve across all areas despite some of the challenges around the pandemic, and that the feedback from social workers was very positive. So I'll leave it there, Chair, but happy to take any questions.
Okay, just before I open the floor for questions, I would like to say well done to Tim, everybody in the children's services that has worked outstandingly to bring the council from inadequate, which is a shameful position to be now at good. So you're moving forward, and I'm hoping that we can get to outstanding overall and in the other categories. I think that is what every child within your care deserves, and the council has to strive for that. So I'll open the floor for questions. Councillor Chadder.
2 quick questions from me, and congratulations, well deserved. 2 more practical questions. On page 80, you've given us a graph or a chart showing the number of caseloads, and it's bag rated. Could the committee get information on how many cases social workers should be holding? We're told how many they're currently holding in the different departments, but not what the target and the ideal should be. Yeah. And then my other question was around by 2023, I want to be a beacon of practice excellence. Could you unpack that for us a little bit more? And who would be the awarding or the accrediting body that would recognise you for that excellence? And what do you need to help you achieve that?
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Answer to the first question, yeah, absolutely provide a bit more information about where we've set the sort of measures of what an appropriate caseload is. It's different across different areas of the service. And we've done some benchmarking across London, and actually some of that benchmarking work led to some further investment a year or so ago to ensure we had sufficient capacity in the workforce, given the volume of work that there is. The becoming a beacon of excellence, essentially it started out as a way of thinking about progress and our aspirations beyond Ofsted. So obviously lots of people look to Ofsted for a external stamp of, is this a good service? But what we know is Ofsted only look at for a certain lens, and whilst we're very pleased to get the improvements and it's a necessary requirement, we wanted to have an ambition beyond Ofsted. So we started talking about becoming a centre of excellence. And really what we're starting to do now post Ofsted is really define what that means. But there are some examples I could give you. So our partner in practice, whereas the sector-led improvement partner was Leeds City Council. Leeds went on a similar journey. I think it was 2009 when they were found to be inadequate. They're now outstanding, and they have been for a significant period of time. They focused very much on a restorative approach to children's social care, and actually they've extended that to a restorative approach across the council. And they, through DFE support, established a centre of, I think it's a centre of relational practice, and they partner with other local authorities to support them in their improvement work, and they've created a community of local authorities that all practice in a similar way. So I suppose that, and it needs a bit more careful calibration and measurement, but that aspiration is about, and you can probably see my sticker here, it's new circles of support. That is our practice model. It's drawn on both influenced by Leeds, but also influenced by using a systemic approach to working with families. And we've invested heavily in a social care academy, which is our learning part of our organisation, and it supports a lot of training and development of social workers, and a clinical team with a clinical director. And that clinical team very much is there to embed the practice model, circles of support. I've already received lots and lots of inquiries about what we've done in Newham, and about that practice model, that relationship-based practice model. And I think there is a really excellent opportunity now for us to define, what that centre of excellence looks like. And it's about not just the internal learning, it's about becoming a place that other authorities turn to look for support around developing a very clear practice model, and also support around their steps towards improvement. So a bit more work to do on it, but I hope that paints a picture of what we're looking for.
Very helpful. And I think it's really helpful to see such ambition in a report as well. And I think it's a very good legacy to build on to try and develop that. Perhaps at some point you could come back to us about what the indicators are for that example of excellence as well.
Sorry, Tim, will that be in the updated report to the Children's Service Improvement Board for this month?
So the Children's Services Improvement Board next week, we're going to start to explore what that looks like and talk about the process of defining it more clearly. it's sort of a closing meeting. So the date the Ofsted report was published marked the end of Department for Education intervention, and the formal sort of intervention through the improvement advisor also ended on that day. But the improvement board wanted to come back together to mark achievements, but also look at what next. So, whilst we're really pleased on progress, clearly there are still areas we want to improve further, and there were 4 areas that Ofsted identified. We want to present our initial thoughts around improvement work there. We also don't want to stop having improvement boards, so we will sort of calibrate the frequency and what that actually looks like, but we never ever want to go back to where we were. So I think that there's a clear resolve in Newham to ensure we have the right system in place to ensure if there are any warning signs that the service is deteriorating again, there is very clear corporate and political oversight of that, and therefore action can be taken quickly. Because what we know is, what I know is, children's services, it takes a long time to improve them, and it can be really quick journey to deteriorate. You have to be on your game all the time. You can never be complacent, and you always need some external scrutiny, because otherwise you lose sight of where you need to be. So there will definitely be some ongoing children's services improvement work. The formal work from DfE has ended, and next week is really just marking that ending. And we will present some proposals around what comes next.
Okay.
And just if it's helpful, Chair, I've already presented to the DfE team about what we did in Newham, how we got from where we were to where we are now, and I think there is a lot of interest in that sort of more widely.
That's very good to hear. Councillor Paul.
Thank you. I just got three points to my question. One is on the result, 2 on sustainability, and 3 on what I call complexity, but I'll tell you what I mean about it. On the result, Tim, I don't think we can say well done enough, right? And I think it's a well done, a really good result in that. And just on that, I wondered, you said something, lots of people have asked you how you did it. I think there's a wider audience for how Newham did it. And I wondered whether you could get a management consultant. There's a way, because I've obviously in a previous place, I've seen some of the documents. It's very social worker language, right? Which is exclusive to who are not a social worker, which will mean you will miss out on the nuance in that. And I wondered whether, if you look in any management discipline, where you look around turnaround situations, it is written in a particular way. It references certain management theory. If you go to the management consultants, there are set theories they use to benchmark their turnaround situations. And I think if we were to explore that and use a different, more business-centric language, I think it might help us to understand what happened internally and help you explain what you did. Because I think what you've done here, I think there are lessons outside children's services. I'm not sure whether you know what those are yet, and I've been interested in a sort of a much more core-centric management piece of work, explaining what you've done without the jargon. Could have asked, like I said, some key if people out there looking at you from key theories and they want to know how do you do it, so I have to say that, but well done result. My second point is on sustainability. I looked at section 4.3 where Ofsted mentioned some future areas for improvement. But under this section, well, is there any significant team redesign required? In answer to Councillor Chadder's question, you said you're more concerned about getting the result than on performance appraisals. So basically, you've got to go back to business. So what does that look like? because obviously for the last 2 years, you've been trying to meet a target. What team redesign needs to be done? And can you give us some flavour around that? Have you got all the right elements in place under your control in children's services? What more needs to be done? And I think over the past years, you had a few bits of resources given your way to help you. Now, obviously, in terms of the financial situation, there's an element of sustainability. You may not have those resources given to you in the future. So how does that work? Because you've been surviving on extra money for the past couple of years, which you might not get, or you might get, we don't know, in the future. So can you just, around sustainability, those are the planks on my thing. And once you've done that, I want to come back about what I term complexity.
Sorry, Tim, can I just ask you to give very brief answers to that, please? Thank you.
So possibly we need to follow up outside the meeting, Terry, but yeah, just briefly, yes, on number one, I've tried to strip back some of the jargon and I've done a quite condensed version of what I think were the ingredients. And some of that, you know, relates to some of the conversations earlier around culture. And I think Colin and I have already talked about any wider lessons, perhaps, around organisational culture. And I think we can probably use some of the additional support from Leeds and the improvement advisor. We've got them sort of until end of March to perhaps think about how we tell a story more effectively and to a wider audience. So no, really, really good point. But to be honest, I've been right in it and I need to step back a bit. Sustainability, again, very good question. Yeah, there is some work around redesign, chiefly because the portfolio's widened since the Ofsted inspection. So brought in some other elements of child health and early help and youth empowerment under my remit. And we've got a series of away days to do some reworking of how that model works and how to get the best out of all the component parts, given, you know, what we know is going to be a financially constrained environment moving forward. And then in terms of extra money, you're right, we needed over and above what you might normally expect because of the distance we had to travel within the timeline we had to travel it and just how poor things were back then. Now, some of that stuff has been sort of built into the base budget, you know, and although we're going to have to make efficiencies, there are certain elements that I really want to hold on to. So around, we just talked about the model of practice, the social care academy, some of the improvement capacity I've had. I don't want to go backwards, and B, there are other areas of focus, you know, SEND, for example, where some of that capacity I can now redirect so I can manage on social care, but focus more on the improvement journey in SEND.
And just quickly, fantastic, the house has been built, the foundations are in place, but a resident will say, we've got county lines out there and youth serious gang crime. So what is your new service going to do for those issues which happen on the street? How will the resident feel the benefit of this result?
So, two answers to that question. There are lots of residents who are already benefiting, whether they be children in care, care leavers, children who are subject to a child protection plan, or children who receive early help. They are already benefiting from a much better quality service. And that can number up to 3,000 families or children, I should say. So that's a reasonably significant number. In terms of county lines, and we've had this conversation a number of times before, the reason I was slightly late, and apologies for that, I've just come from an event with the voluntary sector talking about exactly that. We had a great presentation from someone working with British Transport Police about the county lines activity they're seeing in Stratford, going through Stratford Station. We know it takes a whole system approach to deal with it. We know it's complex. We know this is a result often of organised crime, and we know we're not going to resolve it all overnight. But I think there are growing signs that we are seeing a greater reach of interventions, a clearer evidence base about the interventions that we are using, and we've attracted over £4 million over the next 3 years of additional external investment in those programmes and their evaluation. So there is no simple answer. If I was sitting here and said to you, we've got it all resolved, that would not be a fair description. But, you know, we do a lot of comparison with other parts of London and what they're doing. No one's got the full answer, I think it's fair to say, but we are emulating examples of where we see better practice, and that's all sectors working together, a really clear communication of what we're doing, and I think we could get better on that, by the way, and you know, a really clear set of interventions that are being deployed.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Tim. I'm going to draw that item to a close because we've run over. But I will now, for reasons set out in the report and its appendices, the committee is recommended to note: 1, the findings of the Ofsted Inspection of Local Authorities Children's Services report published on the 21st of September 2022. 2, steps forward taken by CYPS in continuing to improve services and how it monitors the improvements through the quality assurance. To members present in the room, may I see by a show of hands, is the recommendation agreed? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Tim. I'm going to now move on to item 7, Treasury Management Mid-Year Report 2022-23. I invite the officer Alison Mackey to give a brief introduction to the report, and then I will open the floor.
Thank you, Chair. This is the second report from Treasury Management for the year. We're required to produce 3 reports. So you've had the year-end report. This is the mid-year report. You will see that it's fairly similar to the report you had at the last committee meeting. The forecasts provided in the report are out of date. Things are fairly dynamic at the moment in the market, and it's moving around quite a lot. There's no change really from the year-end report. It's still investing mainly in either the government itself in the debt management office or with other local authorities. Investments are kept fairly short and are reducing, but not quickly. I think at the moment we have about 180 million on deposit. Debt has not moved at all this year. There's been no new borrowing. And that's it.
Thank you, Alison. Any questions?
I've got.
Councillor Paul, please.
Thank you, Alison. It's just using your word, Alison. You mentioned the word dynamic. I think I know what you meant. Just on section 4.3, financing the capital programme for residents. I'll read it. Just the line. The strategy remains to delay long-term borrowing, thereby reducing the risk of carry and the budget impact. With the market being so dynamic, how is that delay period got longer, and is our capital programme at risk if the market turns against us? When does that decision become a dynamic one?
At the moment, we're holding about 180 million, so there's no rush to go and buy at the moment.
Okay.
Interest rates are forecast to peak towards the later part of next year. So investment balances should stay fairly stable. We're expecting to end the year on about 140 million. If we need to borrow, there's the temporary borrowing market, and we can delay for a further year for long-term borrowing.
Thank you.
Conrad, please.
Chair, can I just add to that? I mean, yeah, Alison's absolutely right. Yeah, in such a dynamic economic circumstances at the moment, one would be hesitant about entering into very long-term financial transactions. Although interest rates are on the rise, At the moment, again, as the report shows, the forecast, and that only forecast, no one knows for sure, but that those rises, should peak reasonably soon and then rates start to fall. So employing, at what might be a peak in the rates would be risky. But your general point, Councillor Paul, interest rates are clearly higher than they were. Our financing strategy had always anticipated interest rate rises, but not at the rate and pace that we've seen. I think, in fairness to ourselves, no one really saw that sort of pace of interest rate rises coming. That clearly presents issues for financing new items, or cost of capital has gone up. So like every organisation across the country, and indeed probably across the world, because the interest rate rises aren't just a UK phenomenon, we will be looking very, very hard at what else goes into the capital programme and decisions around that as part of the budget.
I just want to follow up. Yeah. Okay. So we're just about to go into the budget setting period. There are those, if there are projects which are on the books at the moment for authorisation this year, but the capital becomes so expensive that we can't do those projects, how will that information be communicated to members?
So projects for decision this year, in other words, those given the scale of items of capital expenditure, those come through the Cabinet decision-making process. All Cabinet reports are accompanied by independent of the report author, financial implications provided by the Council's Finance Department that will set out the financing costs associated with that decision. So it remains, a matter for Cabinet decision-making. Clearly, the sensible thing at the moment is to try and avoid those decisions where it is practical to do so, to kind of wrap them up into the overall budgeting process, which is what we're doing. But individual items will come forward in the usual way of things. Sometimes these are, for example, financed by government grants, or there are a range of other sources of finance for the capital programme as well as borrowing. Thank you.
If there are no further questions, we'll move on. I will now read out the recommendation. For the reasons set out in the report and its appendices, the Audit Committee is asked to note the report. To the members present in the room, may I see by a show of hands, is the recommendation agreed? Thank you. We'll now move on to item 8. Thank you very much, Alison, for your presentation. Item 8, lessons learned report on the £100 council tax refund project. The committee is asked to note that an updated version of Appendix 2 with the latest figures was due to be circulated before the meeting. Did everyone see this?
I've received an email to say that.
Chair, unfortunately, the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Community haven't published any further statistics on energy rebates since the release of the July data, which was released on the 1st of September.
Thank you. I will invite the officer, James Partis, to give a brief introduction to the report, and I will then open the floor to questions. Thank you. Is James in the room? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll give a brief introduction and then open up for questioning, obviously. But the report, in a relatively sort of clear narrative, sets out the sort of project journey that we went on in administering the national government energy rebate to households across the borough. And the first thing I'll say is I really welcome the Audit Committee's interest in this area, because it has been an area of significant challenge and progress and learning for the service. And this is a really good opportunity for us to, in an open forum, receive input and challenge for future learning and for inputting into how these sorts of administered and directly administered financial benefits to residents might be handled better in the future. The first thing I will say, and I think this is set out in the report, is there are kind of a number of major challenges that the council faced and the council tax team faced in administering the energy rebate, which are common across local authorities across the country. And a lot of these challenges have been flagged, through national forums, select committees and in other places, particularly around the the lack of government foresight and planning around how monies were to be administered in a timely and verified way to households that do not pay their council tax by direct debit. And that is where the majority of the technical challenges for the projects were felt, where households are paying by direct debit. The payment process and validation process is relatively straightforward, and most authorities found this a simple part of the project to implement. And in Newham, we have a really substantial proportion of our households that are do not pay their council tax by direct debit, and that is an unusually high number in comparison with other local authorities. So we were sort of disproportionately affected by the lack of planning and lack of clear guidance from government to administer payments in that way. I do think it is fair, though, to ask questions about how quickly did the council tax team and the council more broadly, and this required cross-service, cross-council mobilisation of technical solutions to get payment processes set up for those households up and running. How quickly could that have been done, and what are the main lessons from the challenges that we faced? The report kind of sets out those challenges in a number of sort of key areas. One of them was the technical challenges of establishing a sort of payment mechanism, which was supported by the development and procurement of a technical solution, which is set out in the report through a third party who we had used before and had given us, a reasonable roadmap for developing the technical solution, which then in practice, when we were attempting to integrate that solution with other systems like Fusion, turned out to be far more complicated than first imagined. And that was one of the major sort of stumbling blocks in the projects, which we've observed, and we think there are some really good recommendations in the report tackled differently in the future. Other issues that emerged beyond that were issues relating to the pace at which we communicated with residents around their eligibility for the rebate and what the timescales are going to look like for receiving payment, particularly for those households who do not pay by direct debit. One of the key learnings, I think, is the delay that occurred in the project around getting that communication out to households did result in a significant amount of contact coming through to councillors across the borough, our call centre, social media feeds and other areas. And a lot of that contact could have been mitigated or prevented with some earlier and timelier communications to residents, despite the technical issues we were facing. And then the kind of final challenges the project sort of and lessons learned report highlights go into detail around how we might and how services worked collaboratively together to find new solutions to technical challenges. And in many ways, there are some learnings around how this initiative should have been treated like a project. Technical roadmaps agreed with ICT and other colleagues at an earlier stage would have resulted in a faster deployment process. And we may have, through those methodologies, predicted some of the issues that we stumbled across, I suppose, through testing and through deployment. What I will say is, while those challenges are noted, I would like to commend the work of the council tax team in moving quickly once those issues had become significant to move to a position where we resolve those issues quickly. And you can see from some of the statistics that are provided in the report, Newham was in a position of being one of the poorest performers in the country in relation to rebate uptake in the early benchmarking data. I think April or May was the first round of that. The data I think we've got in the report is July from recollection, which shows that we've, Newham, while still not near the top proportion of authorities for the timeliness and pace of delivery, had moved up from its previous position and is not too dissimilar from other authorities with similar challenges that we face. But in the period since July to the point we've got to now, we've really made really significant progress, and 99.9%, I would say, of households have received their rebate, and it has been done in a way, I suppose, that has really tried to maximise the financial benefit to residents directly. Some authorities made the decision early on in their rebate programme to simply administer the rebate through a top-up to council tax accounts, and that's a really straightforward thing to do. There aren't many any at all really validation activities required to do that. You can simply administer it, and you'll be giving your money to the right person. There was a real policy endeavour in Newham to make sure as many households as possible received a direct financial payment into their bank accounts, which led to the early effort required to address those technical challenges in establishing payment processes where we hadn't, no authority had established payment processes to do that at the scale that we were trying to do it. And I think because of that policy decision, which was rightly or wrongly a decision that was informed by conversations politically and across the council early on in the project, a more significant proportion of Newham residents received a direct financial payment into their bank accounts than they ordinarily would have if the easy path were taken on this project, which may have resulted in a higher rate of and pace of implementation, but perhaps a lower benefit to Newham residents, which I think is something to just be reflected upon and perhaps discussed in more detail. Sorry, that was probably quite a lengthy introduction.
No, that's fine. You've given a lot of information, so I'll open the floor to questions. Councillor Chadder, please.
Thank you. We have a project management office, don't we? Just wondering what their role in all of this was. And did we deploy them? I'll just say my questions entitled to save time. I asked at the last meeting if there was going to be an internal audit review. And having read the paper, I don't think there's anything much to be gained by going through this again. But would it be possible to get a breakdown of the number of complaints that we received because of the system's challenges that we had, and how those complaints were resolved, whether they were resolved at the first stage or whether it led to second ones as well? I think what the council tax scenario shows is exactly where our systems overall as a council may be lacking. And it'd be interesting to know, at what point did we appoint a senior responsible officer in the process? And is the shift and the turnaround linked to that, or was there something we could have done earlier? Have we taken up the offer of an extension on managing the scheme?
Yep. Should we take those in turn? I think, sure. If you don't mind, Chair, if I bring Connor in, who has some of the data on complaints, and then I'll have to take up the other questions.
In terms of project management, that, as says in the report, is one of the weaknesses in the implementation, really. We very much went down a software route with a familiar provider who was using a mechanism that we were using every week to refund council tax in order to pay this. So that familiarity probably made us feel like this was going to be a much easier journey.
Clear, I was talking about whole kind of organisational project management, as opposed to just a tech one.
Yeah. Okay. Shall I pick that particular point up if you want to pick up the complaints point?
Yeah, in terms of complaints, I mean, I didn't publish figures because I didn't want to be, I couldn't be 100% sure. And I know there's been a lot of traffic through the contact centre that might not have been recorded, particularly in that way. But in terms of service requests between April and August, we had 230 come through that kind of complaint service request channel. We had 9 first stage complaints, none went to stage 2, 8 of those in August, 1 in June. And we had 76 members' inquiries recorded on the casework system, with kind of 24 in June and 30 in August being the peak of those. So I can tidy those up and let the committee have those afterwards.
The other aspects of the question. So with regards to the role of the project management office, I think that is a really valid question to ask, because this was picked up as a sort of service-led initiative, very much, I think, and I'll have to be corrected by other colleagues who are here with me, but I think Connor alluded to this. I think there was a sense that this was just an amendment to BAU in many ways. I know the processes were new, the requirements of government were new, but there was an endeavour to sort of treat this as a variation on existing practice rather than a project that required change management, I suppose, and technical engagement and cross-organisational planning. And as such, the corporate PMO wasn't involved at the outset of the scheme. I don't. One of my is sort of a lesson really for the role of the PMO, because lots of things that services will want to do in response to legislative change or development of new service delivery models or initiatives will resemble change projects. Now, the corporate PMO will never and should never probably be resourced to get involved in every single initiative across the organisation that resembles that. But the role of a high-performing PMO should be focused on developing capabilities, skills, approaches, and tools that can be used by any manager and leader across the organisation. And I don't think that, that's where I think there is some corporate learning around how services and service managers can access those methodologies and be developed in those skills in the future, and bring in the PMO where required for really high complexity, high challenge projects. Question about the SRO-ship of the project. That was initially the Director of Resident Experience, and that was the position from the initiation of the work required up until I think around July, it might be June actually, where at that sort of juncture, I became temporarily responsible for the Resident Experience Directorate and sort of took direct grip of the position and provided more direct sort of oversight and support. And I think because of my professional background around change management and project management, hopefully added some value to the way the project was being sort of supported during that period. I can't recall if there was a further question that I've not addressed, so that's helpful.
What were the flags then? How did you know that it was struggling?
So Connor's given some information about the number of service requests coming through. Councillors, both within Cabinet and across groups, were rightly receiving significant contact from residents, either through casework, social media, a range of other sources, were clearly giving rise to a need to look at how the energy rebate was progressing. We were aware, I think, at a relatively early stage that our benchmarkable progress with other local authorities who were doing the same thing wasn't putting us in a favourable position. And the other sort of, I guess, one of the challenges that I identified at an early stage when looking into this was a seeming sort of roadblock and lack of clarity around resolution to technical challenges that the project was facing, which had been worked through to a relatively significant degree by service managers and ICT, but required just a little bit more sort of senior intervention to make sure that resources in certain parts of the council, like the ICT technical team or additional support from within council tax, was being mobilised quickly and put around the project. So there were some roadblocks which just required a little bit more sort of direct senior intervention. And in addition to that, sort of daily catch-ups and additional, project support and challenge for the officers working involved to help them work through the approach. In addition, some additional structure around more regularised member briefings were built into the approach. We had weekly briefings at Cabinet, more regularised and formal written briefings to councillors, and a dedicated plan for aspects of the projects like the technical solution, the comms plan, etc. were developed quickly on the back of that.
Okay, thanks. Councillor, very quick question, please.
Yeah. Okay. In the report, it says the committee is asked to note the challenges, but I see no specific initiatives to write those challenges. And because I've been told to be brief, I'll just say what I think they should be. And I'd like perhaps for you and Conrad to give some consideration of how you could perhaps alter the report. Number one, culture. You gave a very good explanation to Councillor Chadder, how we didn't spot the problems coming. There's no lateral matrix level of communication in the organisation. We talk a lot about culture, but obviously the cultural organisation couldn't work on a complicated, messy problem. Number two, I would like to see perhaps a direct debit or standing order programme initiated across the organisation. I would like to see that perhaps coming back to this audit board, right? Across the whole organisation, council rents, payments, the whole thing. I will not accept that our residents are so poor they can't do direct debit. As I will say in another place, try getting Sky TV or smartphone without a direct debit or standing order. So I remain to be convinced on that. Number 3, use of the project management office. I think it's pretty unfortunate that was not used. And 4thly, communications. No one knew what was happening. People don't mind things going wrong as long as you manage their expectations. So in terms of the report, perhaps via you, Chair, I'd like to see perhaps a revision come back to this committee, looking at one, culture, and it's wider than your area. The issue, there should be a wider direct debit standing order programme across the organisation. How do we get the project management and the SRO culture processes in place? 4, about communication. It doesn't take much effort to write 200 words and you send it on social media. It's not rocket science. So perhaps you might want to come back and just tell us.
Okay, so James, you've heard that. I'm going to close this item. So that means that you're not accepting the recommendation.
I'm not, Chair. I don't know what my other colleagues are.
Okay, so we'll note James and to bring back a revised report incorporating the comments. So this item will not be. Thank you very much for yourself and the team that have come today. We're now going to move on to item 9, quarterly internal audit update. I invite the officer Nicola Metevier to give a brief introduction to the report, and then I will open the floor for questions. Thank you. Nicola.
This report advises members of the Audit Committee of work that's been completed since the last meeting and up to the end of September, and the level of assurance on that work. So it includes an overview of the work, a summary of the implementation of recommendations, a draft internal audit plan for the 3rd quarter, and a rolling 9-month plan of other potential audits. As the report covers a number of different topics, I'm not going to draw attention to any particular one, but I'm happy to answer any questions that members have in any of the areas.
Councillors.
Okay.
Councillor Hall, please.
I'll ask about contract waivers and contract extensions. In the report, there's a lack of detail.
Right.
What they are.
Okay.
So I think I know what I want to say. I'm not quite sure because the information is not in the report. So I would like to know what department / directorate are these contract waivers and extensions for? How much? Who signed it off? Who's the manager and who's the senior manager? And whether, if they have broke contracts down in orders, is there disciplinary processes in place? Because we've got contract down orders in place. And my recollection, somebody's got inside their job role to authorise council money being used for an extension. So I'd like to know what are the implications of this, and your report doesn't quite cover that.
Okay, so this came up. This came up at the CMT meeting as well.
Glad it did.
Sorry.
I'm glad it did.
And so I circulated after that meeting a spreadsheet basically setting out the contracts, how much had been spent, and where the gaps in controls were. I understand that procurement, who didn't challenge at the time of the report, then went away and looked at the contracts in more detail. And actually, after quite a lengthy examination, they were able to identify and fill some of the gaps. I don't know any more details of that at the moment, but it was part of the follow-up audit.
Conrad, could you come in, please?
So if I could, Chair, I think we just need to be clear about what a waiver is. A waiver is a permission not to follow the ordinary process. And that, if I may put it that way, can happen for sort of two principal kind of reasons, sort of good and bad ways. So, for instance, sometimes, entirely unexpected and unpredictable events happen and something needs to be bought, with considerable urgency, and the waiver process exists precisely to enable someone to do that outside the ordinary rules. It's a permission to go outside the ordinary rules, and that, if you like, is a good reason for granting a waiver. And I think everyone would accept in any big organisation, from time to time, that is just going to happen. There are also, in fairness, if you like, I can't think of a sort of more diplomatic way to put it in this meeting, and maybe it's fine not to be diplomatic, bad reasons. So if a contract is expiring next month and the manager in question clearly should have started a procurement process months ago to deal with it, but hasn't, then the lesser of two evils, at that point is to grant a waiver to enable the extension to be granted lawfully, because otherwise you're simply not going to have the service to deliver on the 1st of next month or whatever. That is, if you like, a sort of a bad reason for having to grant a waiver, but it's nonetheless appropriate under those circumstances to grant a waiver because it's less bad than the alternative. Clearly, in the latter case, and that's what why the data on the contract register is used, that again, it feeds entirely into the conversation we've been having about performance management. If in a department, one saw one instance of that in a year, one wouldn't condone it, but okay, it's a big complex organisation, not everything works perfectly all the time. Similarly, if you saw a pattern of that happening in one department or one service area, then absolutely that data would be used through the performance appraisal system, including, depending on the facts of the case, potentially serious consequences. But I do think it is important to draw that extension.
Thank you.
Differentiation.
Obviously, future, at the moment, I don't know whether there's a bad reason or a good reason for a contract waiver or contract extension. And bearing in mind some of the issues you talked about, I can't make that determination. We talked about a spreadsheet,
yes,
which has not been.
If I may be clear again, though, I mean, it's not that the information is secret and can't be provided. And the audit committee's normal practice is to receive a summary report of the findings of audits and to receive appropriate assurance that management action has been taken, to address the point. So, for example, I've given you an assurance about how we use the contract register to try and prevent that happening, and how we can analyse it to take action as appropriate in respect of managers. I'm not saying the information is secret. If you want it, you can have it. But the role of the audit committee, with respect, is more about obtaining that overall assurance about how the organisation is responding to the audits, rather than then sort of carrying out that forensic management by committee.
I think for clarity, I don't want to, and it's not my intention to manage the management, and let me get that on the record, Conrad. But obviously, I just want to know, and it is a summary report. Obviously, from the information provided as an audit member, I can't see whether there's a pattern emerging. So it's a summary of the spreadsheet. Maybe that's, it's
no problem providing that. Yeah. We'll probably have to redact some information.
Of course, absolutely. So the summary of the spreadsheet, just to look at areas, are there any hotspots, any trends, just to add to that assurance which has been provided to the committee.
Nicole, please.
I just want to make the point that in the future, the audit committee is going to be receiving reports of all waivers, so they'll be able to see where they're happening and for what reason.
Thank you, Nicole. Councillor Chandler.
I will say that when I came to this meeting, I thought the document or the report that would concern me the most would be the council tax, and actually it's not. It's your findings on the audit inspection. And the reason to push back a little bit, Conrad, around this is because this is about the heart of fairness and what our suppliers and our contract partners actually perceive us to be. And I think, the fact that we are possibly not running fair processes, and I have no reason to believe that one way or another, but that could be the perception, does cause concern. So I think we do need to unpack that. And it'd also be useful to know that when you share that spreadsheet, what time period are we looking at? Because obviously you can understand contract extensions and waivers being extended during COVID, because that's a very practical reason, but it'd be useful to know that as well. My final point is, the contract waivers come in here, will that also extend to contract variations and contract extensions as well, or is it just the waivers?
The rules at the moment just cover waivers, so that's the information that's going to be provided. So I'd hand that over to Conrad.
Again, contract waivers and extensions, we just clear here. That's a normal process of managing a contract. No contract ever sort of survives without being having some variations made to it in the currency of that, and the council's ordinary decision making applies to that. So kind of trivial routine variations, for example, would be agreed by the relevant manager. In the event the variation was being proposed that would add £1 million to it, it would become a key decision. It would go via cabinet. There's already clear visibility of that. Extensions is a matter of ordinary exercising of contractual terms. So if one has a contract that extends for the sake of argument, 3 years with an option at the council's discretion to extend for 2 years, that would normally just be taken by the relevant manager or senior level, depending on the size of the contract. And there's nothing unusual in extending a contract within terms granted within it. Clearly, it depends on the facts of the case. If it was a poorly performing contract, it would be a strange decision to then choose to extend it. But I think it's just important to emphasise that there's ordinary rules of decision making around that.
I think the challenge is that this report seems to indicate that there's been a little bit of a system breakdown in those rules, and I think that's the assurance that we're looking for.
I take the point entirely, but then broaden that out to think about how we gain assurance on, for example, extensions and variations. Is a relevant point, and we'll take away thinking about how to look at that.
Just a small bit. There was a line in there where it basically said, my question: when will the contract register be robust? Because in the particular form of words where it alluded to, we didn't quite know what our contract register is looking like, and you just confirmed it by saying when you went back to the procurement, to the contract team, they had to rework their sums to get the answer. So it's a general question. What is the state of the contract register? And is there a piece of work on that as an entity in itself? Does that provide assurance to the organisation?
I'd say the Director of Procurement should be able to give you that assurance. I do know that when we did a procurement audit in 2020, a register basically didn't exist. So a lot of work has been done over the past couple of years to actually populate a meaningful contract register. And now it's just a case of identifying gaps and, putting the information in.
And Chair, if I may,
yes.
Director of Procurement reports into me, so I've got the kind of accountability here. Perhaps, if I give an example of how that works in my own department, contract register is not perfect. Perhaps again, no contract register ever completely perfect, but it could certainly be improved. So each month at my management team meeting, we receive, a summary of the contract register of the department, for two purposes. One, to check if this contract's coming up in 6 months' time, where are we with the procurement or similar conversations. Two, so that I've got overview and the management team have got overview to be able to say, but, where's this contract? It's not on there, or why is this one on here? That's incorrect, or should be shown in another department. Precisely as the management discipline to make sure that it is revised and made more accurate. I think there have been some significant issues in getting the accuracy of that right, which is why I've imposed that control. And I think that same sort of discipline exists to vary according to the nature of the department. That same sort of discipline needs to exist across the organisation, because that's how you make sure your contract register is perfect. Your procurement team can't know all of it. It needs to have that scrutiny by the responsible managers to make sure they're keeping it accurate. There have been some issues in keeping that as accurate as it should be. So we're not there yet, but that's the discipline that is in place to try and use it and to keep it up.
What is the most efficient and best way so that assurance of the journey is provided back to the committee? How do we, without creating an additional layer of work, how is it on a regular, is it a quarterly statement of we're on a journey with this? I don't know, what's the most efficient way to do that?
Do you mind,
of course,
if I take a little time to think on that and provide the committee with a written suggestion in the next few days?
That's fine.
Consult with the Director of Procurement.
It comes back to your point, Clive. We're not here to manage the managers, but we're here to assure ourselves, and in that we have to find that happy medium and compromise. Okay.
But that's fine if you could do that.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to bring this item to a close.
Chair, sorry, before we bring this item to a close, the only thing I wanted to ask, if I may, is
Yes.
on the internal audit report, there seem to be a lot of recommendations. I mean, from my understanding, internal audit makes recommendations to improve the services or improve the, the department. A lot of the recommendations don't seem to be implemented in time. Why is that? And, is there something we can do to, is it that, we don't give the service enough time to do that? Is a timeline unrealistic, or is there something else? And is there something we can do so that that is improving? Because otherwise there is really no reason to make recommendations if they're not going to be implemented.
We generally let the service decide what their target implementation dates are. Obviously, if they try to push it into 2 years, we would question why that is. And then we would do a follow-up in 6 months to make sure that they've implemented the recommendations. I would say of the ones at the end of Q2, there are 8 that are high priority, which are the ones that we focus on. And of those, the majority are relating to cyber security, and that's covered by top 4 risks in the risk register and what they're doing to address it. And it's also covered by a report on page 19, which is a plan of what they're doing to address IT weaknesses.
Thank you. Okay. To members present in the room, may I see by a show of hands, is the report noted? Thank you. Thank you, Nicole. We'll move on to item 10, quarterly counter fraud progress report. I invite Officer Nick Sharp to give a brief introduction to the report, and I will open the floor for questions. Thank you, Nick.
Yeah. The report attached is an update of the counter fraud work, or the highlights of the fraud work and results that we're able to share to date financial year, and also include some of the proactive work we've done with the Council Tax Department. Taking the report as read, I'd happily answer any questions you may have.
Any questions for Nick?
Got a comment. Just well done. And some of the housing fraud stuff residents want to read or want to know, because they don't want someone else to get something they can't get. So all I would say, can we publish that? What you can, you don't want to publish what you're doing, so you don't want to, but the successes, because I think it'd be really good to go out there. We're tough on right to buy fraud. We're tough on tenancy fraud. Don't do it. Don't think about it, because we're going to come and get you. That will pay dividends for us as an organisation. So I would personally like to see a little bit of that out there in the media, on social media, and informing people, because that is what residents do pick up on and do comment on.
Noted that just so you're aware as well, that's something that I'm currently talking to with Donna from the housing, Donna Morelli, the assistant director there, and we are planning on a publication on the work we've done and a way that we can share the story and perhaps look at then what's happened to those properties that we've recovered in terms of them going to families in need. So that's something.
Thank you.
Very quickly,
Councillor Shadow.
Say, if any communications comes out, could it really be sensitive that we don't end up with a naming and shaming? I know you won't individuals, but a naming and shaming publication. I really have concerns about that.
Okay. There is a balance.
There is a balance.
There is a balance.
I think Nick understands, and Nicola understands the balance, that it isn't just about, some of these issues can be complicated, but you do want people to be aware that the council does address these issues of fraud in terms of housing tenancy issues. So thank you. We'll draw that item to a close if there's no other questions. So to members present in the room, may I see by show of hands, is the report noted? Thank you. We'll move on to item 11, quarterly update on risk management and risk register. I will invite Officer Nicola Wood to give a brief introduction to the report, and we'll open the floor to questions. Nicola, thank you.
So 3 areas to note on the risk register. A new risk added as number 14, which is the risk of prolonged industrial action in the waste collection. And part B of that is the risk that unrest could spread across the rest of the council. At the moment, it's obviously higher than we would like, and it's monitored regularly at the CMT. So it doesn't just come to the CMT the quarter before it comes to the audit committee. It's regular update to the CMT. I just want to make that very clear. Second one is an existing risk, which is number 12, which is increasing, and that's surprisingly, the risk that the council is impacted by inflationary pressures, interest rate rises and the decrease in sterling directly. And then the part B on that is the risk about our residents being impacted by exactly the same things and hence requiring more services, and there's a greater demand on the council. So one is direct to the council, one is indirect through our residents. And the final one, happily, is risk number 7, the decreased risk exposure with the quality of our childcare services after our Ofsted result. So that has now decreased our residual risk down from that. The paper also includes a summary of Newham's risk management framework as reviewed by Zurich, which was a free test desktop review, part of our social value out of one of our contracts for insurance. So that's glad to see that in action. A suggestion of risk registers that we could bring to future meetings as well, which would look at portfolio risks in James's area, ICT, and then a timetable for some of the directorate risks so that we get a sample of those throughout the year. And then finally, I just put for information, the European Institute of Internal Auditors risk focus for 2022-23, which was not directly relatable to Newham. And if you read it, it does give us some benchmark, but we do have the same sort of risks as many other organisations, such as cyber, such as so I'll stop there and pause for any questions.
Any questions? Councillor Paul?
Yeah, first of all, I like the way you've set out the risk. That's very good. The high level, and you broken it out. That's very good. And on that, number 6 on climate change. I know Conrad's the off, but it says here, and I'll read it out because somebody may be watching. Due to a lack of clarity and understanding of our adaptation and mitigation risks, accountability and coordination risks, and that by not embedding climate risks in our strategic decision-making process, Newham may not deliver carbon neutrality by 2030. If we don't know what we're doing, I don't mean that to be negative, how can we then write a job description to go and recruit someone to go and do that if we don't know what we're doing?
Point is, that's the risk. It's the appointment to it that is the means of managing that risk.
So at the moment, we're not on task by 2030. So have the corporate goals been amended? Because we've only got 7 years to 2030 and we've not made a start. How do we alert the organisation and residents that we might not hit that target?
It's not the case that we've not made a start. So for the last 2 years, I'm sure I'm right in saying 2 years, full council has received a report on, for example, the air quality action plan. The point about the corporate restructure and the new post has been created is to try to give some more dedicated focus and coordination to that area, precisely because of the nature of those risks.
Okay, thank you.
One point out, from my chair. Page 161, 4.1. Registers for digital marketing, transformation and services will be presented throughout the year in agreement with the chair. Does that mean it's included in the quarterly register that will be presented, or is that separate to the individual directorates?
So those 3 directorates are, could I say smaller directorates, aren't the, is that fair? Right. So are one of the big in children's, adults, environment and housing. So I didn't want to necessarily slot them into one of the quarters. I thought that I'd discuss with the chair which ones,
I see.
Gotcha, understand.
Assistant directors to join. So they will be coming because they're directorates. I just didn't want to prescribe when they would come.
So I missed it the other way around. I thought they were coming all the time, but that's fine. That's clear.
Okay, if with no further questions, we'll close this item. Members present in the room, may I see by a show of hands? Report noted. Thank you. Thank you, Nicola. Item 12, year ahead forward plan. The committee is asked to note the contents of the forward plan of items to be considered by the audit committee for the remainder of the municipal year ahead. Are there any questions on the report? Okay. To members present in the room, may I see by a show of hands is the report noted? We'll now move to item 13, date of the next meeting. The date of the next meeting of the Audit Committee is scheduled for 7 p.m. on the 8th of February 2023 in Newham Town Hall. Exclusion of press and public. In order to consider the next item, which is a verbal briefing on account of fraud matter, we are invited to pass a resolution to exclude press and public. Thank you. Members present in the room, I see a show of hands. Yes. Before we go into the exempt session, I will say a quick thank you and good night to everyone that's with us tonight watching on YouTube, and to all the officers that have been on the Zoom call. I will now ask the clerk to stop